Well, welcome once again to our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast. We're starting a whole new theme today on the promises of God. I want to read to you a quote by D.L. Moody. He says, "Take the promises of God, let a man feed for a month on the promises of God, and he will not talk about how poor he is." Then a little later in this same quote, "If you would only read from Genesis to Revelation and see all the promises made by God to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to the Jews, to the Gentiles, and to all his people everywhere, if you'd spend a month feeding on the precious promises of God, you wouldn't be going about complaining how poor you are. You would lift up your head and proclaim the riches of his grace because you couldn't help doing it." That's a pretty good quote, and that's going to be our theme for the next several weeks, the promises of God. I have a book in my hand. It's an older book. Most people may not be familiar with it, although these books have been around for a long time. Herbert Lockyer was a man who scoured the scriptures to find out all there was to say about a particular issue. And he has numerous volumes that he has. They're in our church library. This is all the promises of the Bible. And this is really quite a treasure trove of information concerning all that God has promised to us in Scripture. So we're going to look at some of the things he's identified, maybe some others as well. And as we do so, we're going to start with Christ. This week, we're going to look at 5 promises pertaining to Christ, 5 promises given to us about Christ. And there's many others, but we'll look at 5 together. So we'll start with Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 6. And this promise in the Old Testament would cover from the beginning of the incarnation all the way to the end of the kingdom. "For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace, and on the throne of David over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this." We often read this passage of Scripture at Christmas time because of the opening words, a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us. So it starts there. There's the promise of the incarnation. God was going to send us a son who would be given to us, but then it moves quickly from the incarnation to who he is and what he would accomplish. It skips over pretty much his whole life, skips over the cross and the resurrection and all these things, and moves to the end. And the government will rest on his shoulders. Now we've moved right into the kingdom age here, in which Christ will reign over this earth. The government will be on his shoulders. But before we get to a little more detail about that in the next verse, he says his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. So we're not talking about an ordinary baby here. We're talking about the incarnation of the Son of God. God would become man, and he would be described in a number of ways. Wonderful Counselor, how he counsels us. Mighty God, so he is the God-man, the great deity. He is the Eternal Father, not in the sense he's the Father of the Trinity, but that he is the Father over all who follow him. He's the Prince of Peace. He's the one who's come to give us peace. And then it says there will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace. And so this kingdom that he will rule over, this kingdom of peace, will have no end. It will go on perpetually. It'll never cease to exist. And on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it. So now we're going back to the fact that Jesus Christ was the Messiah of the Jews. He would rule over the kingdom of David, from the throne of David over the kingdoms of the earth. So we have this connection, this promise given all the way back and throughout the Old Testament of Christ coming to set on his throne, the throne of David, and rule over the earth, and to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. So this is not a kingdom like any other kingdom the world has ever known. It's a kingdom of righteousness, a kingdom of justice, and the Lord himself will uphold this kingdom by his power. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. The Lord's zeal, the Lord's power will accomplish this. So these are the promises that we'll start with: the incarnation, and moving right to the end of the kingdom age in which the Lord will rule from David's throne over the earth at that time. What a set of promises, all in 2 verses. That gives us this background, this parameters, the foundation for the promises of Christ that we'll look at the rest of the week. So that's our first promise. You join us tomorrow for a second one.